Welcome to Chapter 8 Money Growth and Inflation on NyQuil. Now, for the last 2 weeks or so, we've been learning about a lot of preliminary stuff to be able to learn how to understand both Chapters 8 and Chapter 9. And here we're going to be relying on a lot of the time series stuff that we learned about in the last lecture. So, with all of that said, let me ask a big question. Do you wish you had $1 million? Because I do. Maybe if you have $1 million already, hey, that's awesome. Do you wish you had another $1 million? Probably do. I mean, pretty sure almost everybody want an extra $1 million. What happens if we give everybody $1 million? Well, we'd all be rich, right? I mean, that's what I think would happen. Wouldn't we all be rich? Because, well, you got an extra $1 million. That's freaking awesome. What would you want to do with it? Buy a car, buy a house, fancy Dijon ketchup, take a limousine because it costs more? I don't know. So let's say there's a helicopter goes flying overhead, and Ben Bernanke, actually I guess now it's not really Ben Bernanke, it would be Jerome Powell, decides to just dump gobs and gobs and gobs of money over our little community. This might sound a little familiar, might sound kind of like what we learned about with Milton Friedman's optimum quantity of money. So if you just get a bunch of money dropped on our little community, what happens? Everybody gets $1 million and they all get it today. Well, all of a sudden, you're not the only person that wants some fancy Dijon ketchup. Maybe you are. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's not even a thing. If it's not, yell at the Bare Naked Ladies. Don't yell at me. And for those of you that are wondering what I'm talking about, it's a band. Or they at least were a band. I don't know if they're still together. They really haven't been relevant since one of their singers left like 15 years ago. So a lot of people would want all the same normal things that you do. Okay, maybe they don't all want fancy Dijon ketchup, but they probably want new cars. I don't know, maybe new boats. Want to take limousines everywhere because it costs more. Maybe they want to crowdfund Terry Matalas' Star Trek Legacy show, which would be kind of a spin-off of Season 3 of Star Trek Picard for any of you that are Star Trek fans. Season 3 of Picard was amazing. Seasons 1 and 2 were crap. Let me think. Yeah, no good Star Trek really exists aside from Season 3 of Picard since about 2005 when Star Trek Enterprise was rudely taken off the air. Everything else has been garbage. The Abrams movies have been garbage. The Star Trek Discovery, or as I like to call it, STD, has been garbage. Strange New Worlds has been garbage. Season 3 of Picard was excellent, though. If you haven't watched it and you like Star Trek, go watch it right now. No, wait till the end of this video and then go watch it. Anyways, what would happen if all these people get all that stuff that they want? Well, I mean, if they all get that money and they all want that stuff, everybody's got more money. What do you think is going to happen to the people who make all that stuff? What do you think is going to happen to these companies? Well, let's make an assumption really quick that everybody gets all the money at once and everybody's aware that everybody's getting the money. So these people are going to go to the stores because they're going to want to buy all the things that they like. But these stores all know that everybody's got more money. And if they don't, they'll figure it out pretty damn quickly. And what are they going to do in that case? Well, they start to raise their prices. And why would they want to raise their prices? Well, the reason they'd want to raise their prices is that prices are a rationing mechanism. So remember, in economics, we've got the problem of facing unlimited wants against limited resources. You want tons and tons and tons of everything. Just gobs and gobs of everything. But you don't have everything to give. The world does have limited resources. Even in the event of Star Trek, where you've got the replicator technology and you can pretty much replicate anything to your heart's desire, there's still one big resource that doesn't exist in infinite quantities, and that's time. So there's always going to be some kind of a constraint, some kind of a finite resource. That's why prices exist. They ration out those finite resources. So everybody gets more money, that's great, but that more money doesn't mean more resources. So what happens is that everybody just raises prices. No one sells any more stuff than what they were selling before. No one buys any more stuff than what they were buying before because the price went up by an equal amount to, well, the amount that everybody got an increase in money. Everybody gets the same standard of living. Prices are just higher. And this is because money is a nominal variable. It's not a real variable. So if you remember with monetary neutrality, any change in the money stock doesn't affect real economic variables like output or employment. Now, in the previous lecture, you're probably going like, wait a minute, I thought you just said that it does. Well, it can, yes. It does in the short run. But there are a number of nominal rigidities that allow that to exist. This is kind of a nice hypothetical here, where everybody knows that there's more money coming in, everybody gets the same amount of money at once. It's not exactly the same thing as like a monetary policy shock observed in the real world. So bear with me here. In this hypothetical scenario, everybody gets more money. They all want to get more stuff, but everybody got more money and everybody wants more stuff. So they go and they want that stuff. Prices begin to rise. And as such, depending, of course, on the speed of adjustment in the price and all that, well, it could increase. It could jump immediately. It could take a little bit of time to increase. But at the end of the day, in the long run, a change in the stock of money isn't going to be affecting any real economic variables like output or unemployment. All right? If the central bank prints an extra $100 million, that doesn't mean more bushels of hay for a farmer to use to like feed his animals with or something. So let's look at a time series of money and the core PCE price index from 1960 all the way up to this year. Let's see what's going on. Well, we've got M2 in blue, and I've got the PCE index in red, the core PCE index. What's going on? Well, they're both increasing, right? Now, one's increasing a little bit sharper than the other. And if you notice, there's a time where they're kind of increasing together a little bit. And then around the 1980s or so, it kind of diverges and M2 follows a fairly straight path. And then core PCE prices kind of flatten out a little bit. They still increase, just not really as much as they did after the 1980s. So this is money and prices. Here we have money and real GDP. Now again, real GDP is increasing. Money is also increasing. Now the money is increasing at a faster rate than real GDP is increasing. But let's look at nominal GDP. So this is real GDP, right? This is stripping out the effect of changes in prices. Now you're still going to have an increase in real GDP, although the thing that's driving the increase in real GDP is not the same as the thing that's driving the increase in the stock of money, because the thing driving the increase in the stock of money, well, let's look at what real GDP is first, actually. The thing driving the increase in real GDP is like changes in technology, things like that, driving growth in the economy. Technology changes, human capital changes. If you take my intermediate macro course, where we're learning about, well, actually, we will be learning about human capital investment really soon, right? It's one of the things that's driving growth in real GDP. So just because you've got two time series that are increasing doesn't mean that they're increasing because of the same thing. Same causal mechanism may or may not be the case. Here, we've got nominal GDP and money. Now, if you look, nominal GDP and M2 are very, very, very closely moving together, much more so than real GDP. Real GDP is growing at a slower rate than the money stock is, but here, nominal GDP and the money stock are growing at almost the same rate. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? I like to think that's kind of interesting. That's kind of cool. Why would that be? Is there anything that we can get out of that? Because it shows us M2 is correlated with prices, real GDP, and nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is at least more correlated with M2 than real GDP, because the correlation between M2 and real GDP is about 0.92, and between M2 and nominal GDP is about 0.96. So these high correlations could simply be driven by a common trend, which intuitively does make some sense, right? Money wouldn't really do much to real variables, only nominal variables, if any of this is to be believed, which it is. It's just on me to show you. But again, that trend in real GDP is being driven by something different than that trend in M2. But the trend in nominal GDP, at least partially, is the same as what is driven by that trend in M2. M2's nominal and GDP, nominal GDPs, well, duh, nominal. So you should expect that they'd be more correlated with each other than what you'd have with real GDP. But those are in levels, right? That's the level of the money stock and the level of GDP and the level of prices. What about money growth and inflation? That's a different question. Now, you might think they're the same because the variables are the same, but the way the variables are being expressed is very different. One is being expressed as the level, and the other is being expressed as a percentage change. So, what about money growth and inflation? How is that different than M2 and the price level? Well, we need percent changes in M2 and the price level to get the growth rate of money and thus also the inflation rate. And that's going to give us this. What do we have? Well, we have the growth rate in M2 in blue, and in red, we have core PCE inflation between 1960. Oh, wait, shit. No, this is between 2018 and 2024, not 1960. Oops and 3/4 on my part. I was like, that looks like a weird increase there for just 1960. And then, yeah, I just look at the time. And this is what happens when you copy and paste stuff. You can make mistakes. So, so from 2018 to 2024, this is what we get. This is the growth rate in M2 and the growth rate in prices, which is the inflation rate. Okay, cool. That's all well and dandy. But what does that tell us, right? Does it tell us that like printing more money causes inflation? No, not looking at the graph. We can see that an increase in money growth could have something to do with an increase in inflation because, well, here you get this massive increase in money growth. I wonder why that is. Look at what year that happened. And a little while later, prices increase a little bit. And they increase and then they kind of start to fall again a little bit. Or actually, prices aren't necessarily falling here. It's more that the rate of increase in prices is slowing. If we're going to be correct about this and precise, as I like to try to be most of the time. So, does it tell us printing money causes inflation? Possibly. Maybe. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. We need to go a little bit beyond just eyeballing the data here. Because you can kind of spin a narrative, but then again, maybe you can, maybe you can't. And we don't want to be those dreaded Austrian economists that I always bitch about. We want to actually use tools in our toolkit that isn't just sitting there, as like an armchair economist. Oh, well, I like to think that because of this and this and this and my ideas about praxeology, and you just go on and wax poetic about it, whatever it is that Austrians go on and on and on about. We can actually use tools at our disposal, one of which is a Granger causality test. You're probably going like, what in the F is that? Well, time to have a story time with me. Now, contrary to what you might be thinking currently, this is not a course in econometrics. So you don't really have to know what that is. Like, you don't really have to know how to do a lot of econometric testing or modeling or anything like that. And I'm going to try not to bore you with like a really long explanation, but the idea is that it tests whether lags or like yesterday's values of one time series or one variable affect current values of a different time series. So instead of going, does money growth cause inflation? Well, that's a tricky question because as economists, we can't just go, X causes Y. We don't get to just say that, right? There's more. Correlation doesn't imply causation. And this is essentially kind of just a form of correlation. This isn't necessarily actual causation. So it's not a direct causality test. It's more of a lagged correlation test or something. That's why it's known as a Granger causality test, presumably named after some guy named Granger. And the idea is, do past values of changes in the money supply affect inflation today? And a Granger causality test can tell us that. So I'm going to use this test, and it's just, I guess 2 linear regressions. I was about to say just one, but it's really 2 linear regressions that are just estimated simultaneously. If you remember that vector autoregression stuff that you guys saw in the previous lecture, well, that's actually just why we're why you learned all that stuff, partially why you learned all that stuff. So here's the idea. You're going to estimate an equation for money, which is a function of lags of money and lagged inflation. So here I've got two lags. So if this is quarterly data, I would have current month or current quarter's growth in the money stock, last quarter's growth in the money stock, and 2 quarters ago's growth in the money stock. And then these alpha 1-1 and alpha 1-2 terms are the relationships between previous values of changes in the money stock and current values of changes in the money stock. All right, but that's really just a control for changes in the money stock that are as a result of, changes in the money stock, right? Like the inertia. But there's other things driving that, right? There's other things that are affecting what current values of growth rate and money is. Inflation might have something to do with it, right? Lagged inflation might be affecting current money growth. And it's last quarter's inflation and 2 quarters ago's inflation might have something to do with money growth. And we'll learn about that a little bit later on. Because what we're really interested in isn't equation 1, it's actually equation 2, but we need to estimate equation 1 at the same time. Equation 2, here's the cool thing. Estimate an equation for inflation, which is a function of lags of money, mt minus 1 and mt minus 2, and inflation, pi t minus 1 and pi t minus 2. And what I've got in blue here, these coefficients, right? So this is the last quarter's value of money growth affecting current inflation, and 2 quarters ago's value of money growth affecting current inflation. This alpha 2-1 tells me the relationship between lagged money growth by 1 quarter and current inflation, and this alpha 2-2 tells me the value or the relationship between values of money growth from 2 quarters ago and current inflation. Because remember, monetary policy, as we've heard ad nauseum at this point, operates with long and variable lags. Emphasis on the long lags here. And I want to see if the coefficient on the lag of money growth in that second equation, right, the alpha 2-1 and also the alpha 2-2, it's not just this guy here, it's also this guy. I want to see if these are, in a sense, statistically significantly different from 0. Essentially, are they such that there is a large influence, or if not necessarily a large influence, an influence in a way that we can go, hey, is this not just a fluke? Is this something we can actually, put money on? No pun intended, I promise. So the idea is, if I can conclude that those alpha 2-1 and alpha 2-2 terms aren't equal to 0, it's more likely that they're probably greater than 0, just based on the intuition that we got from the beginning of this lecture. If you print a bunch of money, right, prices are going to go up. So if money growth increases, inflation is probably going to increase as well. And if we can determine that these two terms are greater than 0 significantly, we can say that money growth Granger causes inflation. Intuitively, Helicopter Ben, or I guess now Helicopter Jerome, gives us all $1 million yesterday. We could have high inflation as a result today. For you stats nerds, it's an F test on the coefficients. It's a joint test. You don't really have to do that. So what do we do? What do I do here? Well, I run the test, and I get a nice F stat, and a p-value on that is ridiculously low, and that's what we want. The lower, the better. If it's less than 0.01, then we're in excellent shape, and it is. It's 0.00002935. That's a lot less than 0.01. So given everything working to our advantage, our degrees of freedom, the F test, right, testing that F stat against an F distribution, we have a very statistically significant value, implying money growth Granger causes inflation. All right, now I want to test the reverse, though. So we've determined that money growth, past values of money growth, Granger cause current values of inflation. That doesn't mean they cause inflation. It means they Granger cause inflation. But I want to test the reverse now. I want to make sure inflation doesn't Granger cause money growth. Or maybe I want to see if it does Granger cause money growth, because there could be a reason for why that would be the case. So if you go back to equations 1 and 2, I'm testing what's in pink, the alpha 1, 2 and the alpha 1, 3, the lagged values of inflation on money growth. And I want to see if that's statistically significant. If it's also significant, well, there's some hardcore reverse causality. And so I test it, and I get a value that's not significant at the 1% level, but it's still significant at the 5% level, which implies that inflation may Granger cause money growth. Or in other words, if inflation gets too high, the central bank is going to go, whoa, we need to curb this money growth to try to curb inflation. Kind of like what's actually happening now, right? The central bank is currently increasing interest rates. Well, actually, I think now there's some suspicion that maybe they're done increasing interest rates and they might actually start cutting rates later this year. Not sure how good of an idea that is just yet, but we'll see. Let's assume that they're the experts here. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about at all, do I? So in theory, inflation gets too high, the central bank cuts down the money growth, and then over time, inflation begins to fall. All right, so if I were to write out the coefficient estimates just for the first lag, and that's just for simplicity, this is what we would get. Here's the cool thing, right? Look at the signs on the pink and the blue terms, those pink and the blue coefficients, because this is like the alpha 1, 1, and this is like the alpha 2, 1, and this is the alpha, or 1, 2, and this is the alpha 2, 1, whatever. Okay, here's the cool thing. Let's look at equation 4 first. 0.007 times mt minus 1. Cool. That tells me money growth goes up by 1%, then inflation increases by 0.007%. Or is it 0.7? I think it actually be 0.7%. I think it's 0.7%. Either way, it's positive. It's a positive relationship. An increase in money growth increases inflation. Cool. What does it tell me in equation 3? It tells me something a little different. It tells me that an increase in inflation reduces money growth. It leads to a drop in money growth. Which also makes sense, right? The central bank goes, whoa, inflation's getting too high. Maybe we need to try to curb that a little bit. So the signs of these estimated coefficients make a ton of sense to us, at least to me. Money growth and inflation are positively related, where inflation is the dependent variable and money growth is the independent variable. When money growth is the dependent variable and inflation is the independent variable, they're negatively related. Interesting. So we had a big question, and that was, does money growth cause inflation? Well, you can't necessarily just go, well, yes, it does. We can say Granger causes inflation, and we use a statistical test to see if Granger causes inflation. So we found that money likely causes inflation, but a statistical test can't prove that to us. It can only provide evidence to support a claim, which makes sense in terms of what the theory tells us, though, right? If you print more money, you have more money chasing the same number of goods, and price is a rationing mechanism. Boom, more money means higher prices. And when COVID hit in March of 2020, this is where I'm going to go to that huge spike in money growth that we were talking about. Hits in March of 2020, we all know, we were all there, we all lived through it. God, that sucked. That was terrible. I can't believe it was 4 years ago already, though, man. Time flies. Glad it's in the rearview mirror now. But in March of 2020, the Fed began buying a ton of Treasury and mortgage-backed securities. And they did so by the creation of excess reserves to the tune of about $3 trillion. It's a huge increase. Now, it was done to provide liquidity to financial institutions that needed it. And we can get to the actual necessity of that later. Really towards the end of the course, I'm going to go into very, very, very great detail what happened with COVID, at least in terms of the economic impacts, especially in responses to the fiscal and monetary policy interventions. But that's for a little bit later. That's going to be late April, early May. But it probably wasn't the best move on their part. And this behavior carried on until March of 2022, and they finally stopped their bond purchases. And the issue is there's a big problem that started brewing around early 2021. See if you can spot it. I'll give you a minute. Maybe you want to push pause or something like that. And think about it in terms of lags, right? So if something happens in 2020, look at 2021. So something happens to M2 in 2020. Go look at 2021 and see if you notice a change. So there's a change in the growth rate in M2. It starts in 2020. And then look at inflation in 2021. Tell me if you notice something that looks a little different. Maybe you do, because I kind of gave it away earlier. Right? Around here in 2021, everything to the right of that big black line is what you're going to be kind of interested in. Inflation started. Well, actually, it didn't start. It just increased. It started to increase by more. Now, it started about 9 months after the large asset purchases began. There's a lot of reasons for this. There could have been pent-up demand that hit in early 2021 as soon as the vaccines rolled out. Now, when that happened and the vaccines rolled out and life started returning to normal, accommodative monetary policy wasn't needed anymore because the economy had begun to reopen, and a lot of the reasons that the accommodative monetary policy was being provided in the first place weren't there anymore. Those reasons didn't exist. Now, there were also large government spending packages that ultimately got indirectly financed by the Fed. But again, that's neither here nor there. We won't talk about that right now. It really all comes down to the fact that monetary policy affects variables like inflation and unemployment with long and variable lags, which means even if they start extremely loose monetary policy now, as they did in 2020, extremely loose accommodative monetary policy, it could take a little while to really start to show up. And, well, now the Fed's got a problem of high inflation. Headline PCE peaked at 7.1%. And as of January 2024, so last month, core PCE inflation was 2.9%. Now, January's inflation, because this was, December numbers being reported in January. As of January 2024, well, I'm not really sure if core PCE inflation has been reported yet. As of February 14th, so I try to record my lectures at least a day early. Now, December 2023 CPI inflation was, I believe, 3.4%, and January 2024 CPI inflation is 3.1%. So inflation's still really high. It's way too high. But given that we had like headline PCE peaking at like 7.1%, and that's year over year. If you did month over month, it was even more terrifying. We actually had like double-digit inflation rates. But it's much lower to that 2% average annual target than, say, 7.1% or 10%. It's a lot lower. So, okay, we're at least getting there. And I guess, well, it, kind of makes sense with, there you go back, equation 3. If inflation gets too high, money growth begins to slow. If money growth begins to slow, well, inflation kind of ticks down. So at least we're getting closer to that target. Now, again, it started in 2020 on the black bar on the left-hand side now. That's where the increase in money growth kicked in, and it's after to the right of that second black bar that inflation began to increase. So it takes time for monetary policy to really affect even so much as things like prices. So the Fed, as they were buying up large amounts of assets, you could see that inflation began to increase substantially. Now, this is core PCE inflation. I believe headline PCE inflation peaked at like 9.1%. So we can see money growth does appear to drive inflation. We heard about it from Milton Friedman even a few weeks, maybe even a month ago now. And we're getting to see the empirical evidence of it as well. So there's like economic intuition, and there's also economic evidence showing that money growth has something to do with inflation. And that, of course, is the answer to the question that we posed at the beginning. What happens if we all get $1 million? Well, it increases prices. So we can all thank helicopter, I guess, Jerome for that. I don't really need to blame Ben Bernanke for something that he wasn't even a member of the Fed of at the time. And I probably need to blame more of it on Jerome Powell. So thanks, Jerome. Thanks.